So I'm going to talk today about functions. This is the first video about them. Functions in programs let us do things that are repetitive or that you would need to do a lot of times. They also help us modularize the code in the sense that we can code smaller and easier to debug pieces of code. You'll see what I mean. In Java, for now, I'm going to say that functions and methods are the same thing. Okay, but that's just for now. So let's have this little program here. What this program does, if we analyze it quickly, it creates three arrays, R1, R2, and R3, with some numbers in there. And then there's a for loop that goes from 0 to the length of array 1 and prints array1.i, then to the length of array 2 and prints the elements of array 2. There's a third for loop that goes through the elements of array 3 from 0 to the length of array 3 and prints the elements of array 3. So we can compile this code and run it. And we see that all the numbers have been split like that. Now, if I don't know what, if I just have the output of this program, I don't really know what it's doing. So what we want to do is we probably want to put something like the system.out.println over here after each one of these. System.out.println, right? And then if I compile it, I can see this better. All right, there's three sets of numbers, okay? Now, if I wanted to add more separation or separate by another line, I would have to code yet again another system.out.println. This can get old. Imagine if I'm doing the same thing several times. So we're gonna code a little function or a little shortcut to this system.out.println. And here's how you do this. You see where it's public static void main and then there's this curly brace? Notice how the other at the bottom one is highlighted. You see right before the last one. This whole area that's grayed out is the code of the method main. We want to create another method. So outside of main, but inside the class. So inside this matches the class up on top. If you see, it's the first curly brace that matches. So you never code outside of this brace, okay? For now. In this brace ends the main method, okay? Now let's code another function here. To do the system, what we want to do is to add spacing here, okay? So we can call it, we're starting like this, public static void. That's, for now, how you will start a function or a method. We'll call it public static void. We're going to call this space, because that's what it'll do. It'll space things out. Open curly braces and close curly braces. And what we're going to do when we say space, we are going to system.out.println, okay? So now instead of putting system.out.println here, I'm just now I'm back in the main method in here, right? Instead of saying system.out.println, what I will do is say space and space. I'll compile this and run it. Run. And I see that I get the same space. I can say space again and space again, which is a lot shorter than write system.out.println. Every time I call space, what happens is the piece of code that's within the curly braces next to space gets executed, meaning this piece inside here gets executed. So it's, for now, it's just a shortcut to just type the long system.out.println and not have it wrong every time I type it. So now the array has been printed, double spacing with an extra line in between. Now it would be nice if I could do this, for example, if I could tell it, instead of typing spaces how many times, I could tell it how many spaces I want. Right? So that would be nice. And you can do that. You can do it in two ways, and I'm going to show you both ways. I'm going to quickly introduce something that's called, for now they're going to be called global variables, and I'm also going to introduce the idea of parameters. So one can have a little variable that tells me the number of spaces. Okay, so for example, in spaces, 2 spaces, for example, right? And it would be nice if within my function I could access that variable. I could see, oh, the code, this code needs 2 spaces in between. Every time I call space, I should call it twice, right? It would be nice if this function could have access to this value, okay? And one way to do it, every function has access to the variables inside their curly braces. Okay, so if I say, for example, int space equal 2, and then what I will do is for int I equals 0, I less than space, I plus plus, system out print line. In this case, for example, I would have this space equals 2, and then this will loop through the number of spaces that I want. So I'm going to remove this one, compile, and run. And that's space 2. Okay. Now if space is 3, then I'll have greater spacing. So look at this. Look at that space between them, right? Now the thing is that perhaps I want to ask the user for the spacing, right? And I might want to ask the user over here. Now remember, functions only have access to the variables defined within their curly braces. So if I ask the user here how many spaces they want, I cannot read that value over here. So there are many solutions to this. One is I could ask the user over here how many spaces they want, but then I would be asking them every time I call space, because every time I call space, the code within space gets executed, right? So I would be asking every time, for every single spacing, I would be asking how many spaces do you want. It'd be nice to ask it all in one place, say somewhere in here, okay? The problem is that if I do a variable over here, there's no way for me to see it, to access it within these curly braces. Remember, the variables that I have only live within the curly braces of that function. Okay, so I'll show you what I mean. So for example, we say, I've imported the scanner, so we say scanner s equals new scanner system.in, and then we say int spaces equals s.next line. Okay, now I have int space here, compile, whoops, here, oh, next, I'm sorry, next int. All right, so now we'll run it. I'll put the spaces that I want. I want 10 spaces between each thing. It still printed the 3, right? So this variable spc here has nothing to do with the variable spc here, okay? They're not compatible. Whatever I do over here inside the curly braces of main, this is main, right, has no effect over what I do here in the curly braces of space. However, there's one way to communicate between these two. I can have a variable outside of main and outside of space, but inside the program. It's called int spc, and I will initialize it to 0. And then if I take out the int here and I remove this guy over here, this SPC, because it hasn't been declared, there's no int SPC, it hasn't been declared within these curly braces, then the program, Java, will assume that SPC has been declared outside of any methods and will look it up here. And it exists. The same thing happens for the function space. It uses the variable SPC, which is nowhere to be found in here. So Java thinks it must be declared outside, and it'll look at here. If we do this SPC equals something else, we'll be updating this SPC here. So let's try it. Whoops. I'm sorry. You have to say static int for now. Run. And now, how many spaces? 1, which is 0 space. And it'll give me 0 space. If I run it again, and I say 2, then that's going to be double spaced, right? And so on and so forth. So I can communicate between different functions, different methods, like main and space, using what's called a global variable for now. Another way of communicating is by passing parameters, and that's what the next video is going to be about.